I'm John Hartness, and this is my monthly Writers Q&A video where my friends and fans and aspiring writers and people who just want to screw with me on the internet can go on to my Facebook group, or if they're a Patreon patron, they can go on to the question thread on my Patreon and ask me anything. There's no guarantee I'm going to answer, but you can ask. So we've got a few questions tonight. Oh, but before we start, today is release day. It's all spooky and shit because it's Halloween. Shingles Collection Volume 1, 6 of the stupidest, vilest, most ridiculous, not safe for work, home, the car, not safe for anywhere novellas you could ever read. Let's see what we've got here. We have The Ghost of Hooker Alley by Robert Bevan, The Monkey's Penis by Steve Wetherill, Gary's Children, which is far less clean and cool and safe than it sounds, Aliens Wrecked Our Kegger, which is the least perverse of the entire series, Zombies Ate My Homework, and The Legend of Jimmy Headshot. This is something that I'm a part of. I wrote the Zombies Ate My Homework novella. Each of the guys on the Authors and Dragons podcast wrote a story, except for Joe Brassi, because he has small children and a life, and the rest of us, well, we're largely reprobates and have nothing to do but make dick jokes all day. So we did. And Tantor Audio has released those. It is climbing up the horror Audible bestseller charts right now, so go out there and get that shit. Pick it up for Halloween and your spooky listening. All right, now let's dive into the questions. As always, you can contribute to this by joining my group on Facebook or being a Patreon patron. My Patreon patrons get a sneak peek at this video. They get it a few days before everyone else, and then it becomes available publicly. And also my patrons get free short stories every month. They get my ebooks before they release, and depending on the tier, they may get asked about, I don't know, I may need help naming a character. I often need help naming characters, so I hit up my Patreon patrons for stuff like that. First question from my friend Jennifer. For me, being close to ready to start submitting writing, should I be looking to submit when ready with a whole novel, or be thinking a novella to start? Okay, Jennifer, here's kind of me riffing on some of the advice Brandon Sanderson gives to young writers when he teaches writing at Brigham Young. Back in the day, the way to build a career was to sell short stories to different magazines and anthologies and build up a resume and build up credibility with your short story writing, and then publishers would come to know you, come to know that you were a professional and that you knew your craft, and they would give you a shot at your first novel. Maybe that novel was already written. If you had won enough awards or were such a badass with your short stories, maybe you could sell a novel on spec. But probably just having more short stories gave you an in to get your novel looked at. Today, it's more about what you want to write. So novellas are a harder sell as a rule. Not every publisher publishes novellas. We do. I'm the publisher for Falstaff Books, and we publish a shit ton of linked novellas. What we do is we take 4 novellas in a series and release them over the course of 1 to 2 years, and then when they're done, we bundle that into a hardcover and paperback and audiobook release. Similar to what we did with Shingles, we released these 1 a month for 6 months, and now there's an audiobook collection. We'll let you know if there's a print book collection coming, etc., etc. But I would suggest that you find what your best storytelling length is. And the best way to do that is to write. I found over the course of the years that my natural storytelling length changes over time. For a while, I was much more comfortable writing novels than short stories. Then I went through a phase when I started the Bubba series where I was most comfortable writing 8 to 12,000 word short stories. Nowadays, I write mostly novellas. I write anywhere from 6 to 10 novellas a year, and I publish them all in multiple series. My storytelling tends to work very well in that space. So there's not a really good metric for what you need to do. What you need to do is write an amazing book and then find a great publishing partner to do that with. If you write novellas better than you write novels, then write novellas. There are fewer markets for novellas, though, so that is something to be aware of. It's changing, it's getting better, more people are publishing novellas, but it's still not as ubiquitous as novels. All right. My friend Nanette asks, on average, how much does it cost you to participate in an event like a Comic-Con? Do you only participate in ones within driving range? I did not realize until last year that authors had costs involved. Oh boy, do we have costs involved. So yes, let's start with that. For the vast majority of authors at a convention, and by this I'm talking about a fan-run, fandom-style convention, we're talking NorwestCon, Con Carolinas, Arisia, ReaderCon, WizCon, Atlanta Steampunk Festival, JordanCon, DragonCon. Those are fan-run, fandom and multi-fandom conventions. They're not your big Comic-Cons like New York Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, Phoenix Fan Fest, or any of the smaller Comic-Cons that are out there. As you can see from my video series, The Long Con, which I started a week or so ago, there's a shit ton of those, and I go to a lot of them. So, yeah, a lot of people don't realize that there is indeed a cost associated with this. The authors, for the most part, we typically get our badge to the convention paid for, or we get it for free, and usually that's it. Unless you are the guest of honor or a special guest at a con, you're on your own for pretty much all the expenses. That means that when I go to, let's say I go to JordanCon, which I'll be at next April. It's a great convention in Atlanta. It started off as being primarily focused on Robert Jordan's work in The Wheel of Time, and they've expanded it over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, however long it's been going. They've expanded it to include a lot more genres, and it's a great little convention. If you're in the Atlanta area, late April, come check it out. When I go to that con, I'm paying for my hotel, I'm paying for my food, I'm paying for my gas, I won't be paying for my badge, and if I end up with a table in the dealer room, I'm paying for the rent on that table, just like the guy selling Funko Pops or the bookstore down the row from me. What I don't pay for is if they set up an autograph signing for me, I don't have to pay for that. But otherwise, yeah, it's the whole thing. I generally budget between $300 to $700 for costs on a convention. And let's lay that out. Yes, I typically only do cons within driving distance for a couple of reasons. I always want to sell books at a convention to defray the cost, and I drive a pickup truck, so I can haul a lot of damn books in my truck. I also have a pretty wide-ranging view of what is driving distance. Next week I'm going from Charlotte to Orlando. That's not next week, that's Thursday. In 2 days, I'm driving from Charlotte to Orlando to go to the Spooky Empire Con. I'll probably be there when you watch this video, unless you're way in the future. In that case, I'm already home. But I'm driving for 8 hours each way. I'm a spotlight guest at that con, which is fantastic. But I'm going to spend, I think it's going to take me about 3 tanks of gas to get there. Right now it costs me a little over $50 to fill up my tank. We're probably looking at $160 worth of gas. The hotel for most conventions is usually about $100 a night. And then I've got to eat. I'm a big dude. It takes a lot to keep all this sexy moving. So if we assume that I've got a $100 gas budget, I usually split rooms with other writers at conventions to keep my room costs down. So let's say I average $50 a night on a hotel. And so 3-day convention's $150. I'm probably going to eat and drink and piss off in the dealer room at least another $150. So for a cheap con, I'm looking at $400. That's if I don't pay for a table. If I pay for a table, that's another cost involved. So I did a small Comic Con last year that was a 1-day event. Table cost me $100. The gas probably cost me, we'll say $30. It was a short trip. Food, it was only half a day. I probably spent $15. So we're going to say I was at $150 cost before I sold a single book. I sold about $400 that day, so I made a little money. But that was a lot of effort for not a lot of money, so it's a good thing that I can meet fans and strengthen relationships with my fans and maybe meet new writers at these events. So yeah, I budget between $300 to $600 or $700 for most conventions. Dragon Con's different. Dragon Con's at least $1,000 every year because it's longer. I leave home on Wednesday and don't get home until the following Monday for Dragon. The hotel is more expensive, and food's more expensive because everybody knows that they can get whatever they want to charge for food at during Dragon Con. So they do. And I drink more at Dragon. I have to. It's medicinal. Really. My feet hurt. Yeah. That's it. So, Nanette, I hope that answered your question. Probably tells you a lot more than you ever wanted to know. My friend Melissa says, ranch or blue cheese? Melissa, you've eaten enough meals with me, you should know. Neither. Those are both nasty. I don't like the texture of most mayonnaises or salad dressings, so yeah, I think they're both kind of gross. Sorry. Trevor asks, what's your favorite lineup of the 4 Horsemen in wrestling? Now this is tough. As a redneck, growing up in the 80s in South Carolina, Crockett Promotions was pro wrestling for me. We're talking Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, the American Dream, Dusty Rose, baby. That's what I grew up on. I remember when Magnum TA had his car accident, there were girls crying in my 7th grade homeroom class because Magnum TA was going to be off TV. Rock and Roll Express t-shirts were, that's just what people wore every day. Admittedly, pro wrestling t-shirts are a fair chunk of my wardrobe today, so not much has changed. But for me, the 4 Horsemen, the recognized symbol of excellence, it's always going to be Rick, Arn, Tully, and Barry. I was never a big Ole Anderson fan. I came into watching wrestling after Ole was already gone. I was much more in the limousine riding, jet plane flying, wheeling, dealing, kiss stealing, son of a gun kind of days. Not so much the Ole workhorse style Horsemen. So yeah, for me it was that later iteration that was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Barry Windham. That's the Four Horsemen to me. Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko and Brian Pillman were also. There's a case that could be made for Pillman, Malenko, Benoit, and Flair as the second best lineup of the Horsemen, in my opinion. But Sting and Luger were never really Horseman material. Let's see. My friend Anna asks, which characters are inspired by real-life people you know, and which are pure imagination? Details and background on the real-life people? Whew. Most of the people that I know end up in a book at some point, largely in name only. But sometimes there's a little bit of description in there. Dennis Bolton, who is now a disembodied soul trapped in the internet, kind of like Max Headroom on steroids, in the Quincy Harker series, he's a real friend of mine. He works at the game store where I play Magic a couple times a week. He looks like the avatar of Dennis Bolton in the books. He's the guy. Christy, the bartender in Harker Season 2, she was one of my best friends from theater. She worked for me for several years. None of those personality characteristics have anything to do with any of these people. Sometimes the physical characteristics will line up, but I never use real people's personalities except one. Skeeter's real. Skeeter, if you don't know Skeeter, then you need to introduce yourself to Scattered, Smothered, and Chunked. It's the first Bubba the Monster Hunter collection. Skeeter is Bubba's sidekick, and Skeeter is a very gay African-American man from the Deep South who is Bubba's tech expert. Skeeter is patterned after my friend Alvin McEwen, who is now a prominent LGBTQ blogger, and was a friend of mine from college, and Alvin was and remains a hilarious human being. And in college, he was about this big around. And yeah, Skeeter is patterned after Alvin McEwen. Almost everyone in Amazing Grace, at least in name, is someone I grew up with. The only ones that are very closely patterned after real people as far as anything like speech patterns or personality are the Three Dead Old Ladies, the Dead Old Ladies Detective Agency. That's my mother and her two best friends, Tot Good, Faye Russell, and my mother, Frances Hartness. Those are the Dead Old Lady Detective Agency, and Miss Faye's the only one that's still with us. So yeah, those are real people. But most of the time I just steal names and maybe a physical description. I don't usually take character traits wholesale. My friend Zach asks, what made you decide to write the Bubba series as a collection of short stories versus a novel or novella? Well, Zach, when I started writing Bubba in 2012, I didn't know if I was going to like it well enough to write a whole novel. I basically had one idea for a big redneck who fought off a shit ton of zombies. And I wrote that as Voodoo Children, and I found out that the character was pretty fun. So I wrote another short story. At the time, I had a day job that was pretty demanding, and I was very busy. I was also self-publishing the Black Knight Chronicles and needed to keep those working. So I had limited time, so I wrote short stories. I didn't think a whole lot about it until I had three or four, really. And then I started thinking about how to market these things and how to make any money. Dean Wesley Smith, at the time, had a really popular, at least with me, blog on self-publishing and publishing, and he was talking about a method that he was using to sell short stories, where having multiple ways to sell each story created enough of a revenue stream so that the stories were working for you 2 or 3 times. And I followed that model because it seemed like a good idea. I switched to writing novellas with Bubba Season 3 because I sell the novellas for $2.99. And $2.99, when you sell an ebook at that price on Kindle, you get 70% of the sale price of the book paid back to you as a royalty. At 99 cents, you get 35% paid back to you. That means that for a $3 ebook versus a 99-cent ebook, I get 6 times the revenue. I write 3 times the words, I get 6 times the money. That's why I switched Bubba to novellas. I didn't do them as novels because, as I learned writing Bubba Season 4, that's not a character that wants to be in long, drawn-out stories. Bubba wants to get in, kick some ass, drink a beer, go the hell home. So that's why I write the novellas now instead of novels. That's why I started off with short stories. My friend Michelle, this is our last question of the evening. My friend Michelle asks, how long was Quincy Harker in your head before you put pen to paper? Not very long at all. I had the idea to write Quincy Harker because I saw that they were going to shoot a Constantine TV show. And I didn't think that they could do the character justice because you can't say fuck on NBC in primetime. I was right. That actor is very good. Matt Ryan's a very good John Constantine, but it wasn't my Constantine. My Constantine was Garth Ennis, Glenn Fabry, and Steve Dillon's John Constantine from the 90s. Hellblazer, Rake at the Gates of Hell storyline, that kind of classic stuff. That's the John Constantine I loved. Well, DC's never hired me to write John Constantine or write Hellblazer. Psst, hey DC, you can hit me up at john@johnhartness.com and hire my ass. I know you canceled the series, but you can fix that stupid shit too. So since DC's never hired me to write John Constantine, I decided to write my own badass, hardcore American magic user. And that's where Quincy Harker came from. He was just my tough guy, spell-slinging wizard. It's like, no, it's not inspired by Harry Potter. It's a little inspired by John Constantine. And obviously there are some pieces that have been pulled from Dracula and plenty of pieces from, I don't know, The Punisher, The Terminator, any kind of popular culture stuff that all goes into a blender and mixes up and creates a character. All your influences come out when you're building a character. So John Constantine wasn't... John Constantine... Quincy Harker wasn't in my head for very long before I started writing him. I was on a little break in my writing schedule anyway, so I was just like, why not? I'll write some shit. It's turned out pretty okay. So, that's all we have for right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to pick up a copy of Shingles, the first collection, there's a link in the description. If you want to join my Patreon, there's a link in the description. If you want to join my Facebook group, there's a link in the subscription. And as always, please remember to like and subscribe so that you'll get all the notifications about when I'm posting either a new Q&A, a new reading, or a new episode of The Long Con. Thanks. Y'all be good to one another, okay?